Hi everyone. Welcome today to our lounge room lobbying segment. Rodney Croome, who is one of our leading LGBTI activists in this country and internationally, and myself, I'm the national spokesperson for Parents and Friends with LGBTIQ sons and daughters. And we're going to be talking about religious discrimination and the best way we consider to lobby our politicians and how to get involved with some activism around this issue. So first of all, we're going to have Rodney talk about the problems with the Religious Discrimination Bill. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Shelley. Yes, I'd like to say just a few words about the Religious Discrimination Bill, which is, from our point of view, a really big problem. When the government first flagged this bill, it said that the bill was about preventing discrimination against people of faith. But what we've since realised, having a closer look at the bill, it's actually about allowing discrimination in the name of faith. There are three main problems with the bill. The first one is that it allows so-called statements of belief. These statements are statements in the name of religion that can be demeaning towards other people, and it could be in the workplace or other situations. The bill goes so far as to actually override some state anti-discrimination acts, including the one in Tasmania, to allow statements of belief even if they are humiliating and intimidating towards other people. This really overrides so much of the work that the LGBTI community's done over the last 10 years in trying to create more inclusive workplaces, because it allows these diminishing and demeaning statements to be made. The second problem is a conscientious opt-out for health practitioners, health service providers, when it comes to particular treatments. So we're talking about doctors, nurses, pharmacists, who are able to say, no, I'm not providing, let's say, hormone treatment for trans people because they have some kind of religious objection. They're not selling contraceptives because they have an objection to that if they're a pharmacist or whatever. There are existing exemptions in our law for healthcare professionals not to be involved in providing terminations, for instance, if they have an objection to that. But this widens that way too far and allows healthcare professionals to pick and choose who they're going to treat and how they're going to treat them. The third problem with the bill is that it allows religious organisations scope to discriminate against whoever they want in the provision of their services, whether it's a school or a hospital or a charity that's based on faith. It entrenches their capacity to turn people away, to treat people badly, simply because they don't agree with them. Now, the people who are going to be most affected by this, of course, we know they'll be LGBTIQ people, that we will be refused treatments and there'll be statements of so-called belief against us and there'll be discrimination. But it really is going to adversely affect a whole range of people who fall foul of traditional religious beliefs. That includes people with disability, it includes members of religious minorities, it could include Indigenous people, as well as LGBTIQ people. All of those people who have traditionally suffered because of traditional dogma could find themselves on the wrong end of this legislation. Now, a lot of people are saying, do we really need to be concerned about this because we haven't heard much about it in the last few months? Of course, the pandemic has occupied the news. I think we do need to continue to be concerned about it, because even if it's not going to come back in the next couple of months, it will definitely be back. There are lots of very influential people who are pushing for this. We need to be prepared for it. We need to be taking action now, because this legislation will return and it will pose a huge challenge to our rights, and it will effectively seek to roll back the discrimination protections we currently have.
I'd like to talk about how to get started. And it's not really difficult, but you need to know that you certainly need to sit and have a think about what you want to achieve, and then of course how you're going to achieve it. And I know personally, when I started with my activism, I mean, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I'd never done anything like it before. And I didn't know anybody really who had done it before either. So what I did was I started talking to people, and I got their opinions on the issue. And then I did a lot of reading. And also what I did was I used to cut out clippings from the paper, and I would keep them. And then I would sort of, when I'd had enough, I would then read them all and put it all together so that I had a case. And also what I used to do was obviously a lot of research. And of course, by that time, you get it all together and you know what your opinions are. Plus, it's very important also to know what the opposition is thinking. So you really need to be talking to some who are not necessarily with your thinking and they're against it. And you then learn where you need to develop your argument, I guess you could say, if you wanted. And then you need to get answers, because if somebody is not agreeing with you, that's fine, but you need to have a comeback. And so I always do a lot of reading. And again, it's like, what do say for this topic, religious discrimination, what is the main issue with a lot of the Christian groups? What is the main issue with just a lot of your friends about it who really don't know probably as much as what you do about it? And so, as one politician said to me one day, it wouldn't matter what I said to you, you would have an answer. And I said, that's right. And that's because if you do a lot of reading and then you have to feel confident with your opinions. And it's also very important when you have your opinions, it's good to listen to what others say, but do not let them sway you, especially if it's to the other side, because if you believe you're right, and that's what you stay with. And also what I would do is you can't go in lacking confidence. And even if you aren't confident, you have to pretend that you are. And I've done this many, many times. And there's been times that I have been so nervous that I have actually sat on my hands because they have been shaking so much. But I still always look the politician or the person that I'm debating with in the eye so they don't know. And you look confident, you act confident. And then also with your debate and your logic, you just keep on going, because you have to have belief in yourself and what you're saying. And you never, ever allow yourself to be put off or intimidated, because if people can intimidate you, I mean, that is not good for, it's not good for the cause. And if you're like me, I do this for my son. So my logic is I can never allow myself to be intimidated or put off or talked over, because I do this for my son. And so if somebody intimidates me and puts me down and I stay there, that's not helping James. And so I've made this a little pact with myself that I've always go in, I am confident and I know what I'm talking about. And if you feel you don't know what you're talking about, you shouldn't be there. So you have to be confident in what you're talking about. And then also too, it's important to realise that when you are debating or talking to others, people have a very, they have this thing about, they should be doing this, they should be doing that. Well, never mind they, it's you should be doing it, your politician should be doing it, but you never worry about the magical they, because they will never do anything. And I think, with the bill, it's very important because, again, it's not only just one group, as Rodney said before, it's several groups. And so you may be like me and you're working with the LGBTIQ issues, but you also need to keep in mind that there's women that are also depending on your debate and your logic, and those with disability. And there are just so many people. And also it's a good idea to get a group of people with you. And if you can get more than one, great. And you can, mix up the ideas and work as a little committee or whatever you like. And when you go to see a politician, if you're a little bit nervous to go by yourself, take one of your friends or somebody else that's working with you, and always have your story written down. Because very often, if you're in the meeting with a politician, as I have noticed several times, they will either be looking at the clock or they will be looking at what's happening in the Parliament at question time or whatever, and they're not always paying attention because they can also be thinking of the last meeting they had or the next meeting. So if you take a hard copy of your story and your beliefs, they're there. So when you have gone, they still have your story. And if it's a personal story, if you want to have photos, photos do a lot because it puts a face to that issue. And I've always taken photos of my son or us as a family. And it shows that whatever that issue is, that is affecting this particular family. And it, again, it's just important to go with what you're thinking and what you believe in. Thank you.
What I want to talk about for a couple of minutes now is just how we can build our case against the Religious Discrimination Bill. It's not enough just to say that the bill is wrong. It's not enough just to say that, there are these clauses that allow discrimination. It's really important that each of us develop an argument against the bill, especially one that resonates with our own personal story or the personal story of someone that we're close to. By that, I mean how the bill, if it's enacted, will actually disadvantage the person speaking or like I said, a loved one of the person who's making the case against the bill. So for instance, if you work in an inclusive workplace, your personal story will be about how perhaps in the past you've experienced stigma and discrimination in the workplace and you don't want to return to that kind of situation where the values of inclusion go out the window and stigmatising and discriminatory remarks can be made. If you're in receipt of healthcare that you fear a doctor might have some kind of objection to, for instance, if you're a transgender or gender diverse person and you're receiving hormone treatment, or if you're a gay man looking for prescriptions for PrEP or whatever it might be, you may be concerned that you'll encounter healthcare professionals who object to that kind of treatment. You may work for a faith-based organisation or receive services from one, and you're afraid that this bill will encourage discrimination by those organisations. It's really important to develop your own story about how it will affect you, not a disembodied group of other people, but you yourself. The other 2 points I'd make about developing your case and communicating that. Firstly, always find opportunities to educate others. Don't berate them. I can understand why a lot of LGBTIQ people are angry and frustrated at the moment because we work so hard for marriage equality. And here we have an attempt by the government to try and roll back our achievement effectively, to try and reinstitute discrimination against us that we thought Australians have voted against. That causes anger and frustration. And they're perfectly natural responses, but they're not useful when you're trying to convince someone else, particularly a politician, why the Religious Discrimination Bill is a bad idea. My advice is always to stay calm and always focus on what you want the other person to understand. Don't get angry at them, don't get frustrated at them. And also remain focused on what the problem is here. It's about discrimination and it's about prejudice and stigma. The problem isn't religion. The problem isn't a particular political party. In fact, people across the political spectrum and people in faith communities are some of our strongest allies. So when you go in and talk to a politician about this, don't say, oh, it's all your fault, or it's all the fault of that group of religious people over there. It's not a matter of religion or politics. It's a matter of discrimination and a matter of stigma. Focus on that. and make sure that you don't alienate potential allies. Educate and focus. They're my two pieces of advice when it comes to communicating why this issue matters to you and what your personal story is.
I'd like to talk about who needs to hear your case against the bill and how to reach them. And that's very important, because with the politicians, you can't just roll up and knock on the door and say, I'm here to get you to change your mind. The idea generally is when you want to make an appointment with a politician, and especially with the religious discrimination, it's the federal politicians. There's really not a lot of point on going and meeting either a state or a local politician, because they aren't the ones that have anything really to do with this. They just have an opinion. But when you go to meet your federal politicians, the first thing you need to do, you can ring and ask, but they will tell you that you need to make an appointment with the diary secretary. So what I always do is I write a letter, attention diary secretary, or you can, when you ring the office, ask who the diary secretary is and their email, and then address it to them, and then you've got everything to send the inquiry to. Now, and what you do is you just keep it brief. You introduce yourself, you just say briefly what it is you want to talk about and who you will have with you. Now, in our case, when we go to Canberra, we always have also the dates that we will be there. And for you, if you're meeting your federal politician in your home state, you just say, well, whenever suits, or you decide when suits you for the meeting, and then you're fine. Also too, if you do get a meeting, then you take, as we mentioned earlier, you take your story written down with a photo, and then you can leave that with them so that they can read it later. And I can assure you that they do keep these, because I was in a politician's office one day and they brought out this file. It was just so thick, and it was from all the letters and things that I had written over a long period. And so that's very helpful if you do that. When you do go to meet the politician, I mean, most of them are conservative. It doesn't matter what party they come from. They're relatively conservative in their manner. And I always suggest that when you go, you also go looking very mainstream. Some people get a little annoyed when I say that, and they say, oh, I should be able to go as I really am. And you can. But it depends if you want to succeed, and if you want to get that politician to listen to you. So I always recommend, even if you don't like it, still go as conservatively as you can, because the idea is keep them in their comfort zone. You want to be able to talk to them. You don't want them sitting there wondering why you have rings in your ears or your nose, or you've got something unusual on as clothing. You want them to be listening to what you have to say. And so I always think that's extremely important. And even if the politician, if you do go and for a meeting, and then all of a sudden, which does happen at times, the politician's not available to meet you, ask if you can speak to an advisor, and then they will pass on what your thoughts are on the idea. And it also makes it so much easier, again, if you have your story written down and your logic about why you think religious discrimination is bad, and then that's then given again to the politician, and it's all done. Now, also with the senators, I mean, you might say, oh, a senator wouldn't meet me. Well, that's fine. Okay. You have so many others in your state that you can still meet. And so that's what you do. You just keep going through the list of people or politicians in your area or the state, like the senators. And that's it. And you sometimes, you might have to write a dozen times before they will agree to meet you, because they are busy. And sometimes it helps if they get to know your name or what you're on about. And so don't expect to get in first time. But if you keep writing letters and you just keep putting your point of view across about the issue, you're either getting through to them by your mail or eventually they will meet. And so that's really all that you can do. And again, if they don't want to meet you, well, eventually I would be either going to the paper and saying, oh, my politician, he's not very good, he won't meet with me, and you just see what happens. Write letters to the editor.
We've talked about developing your case. We've talked about making that case to politicians. I want to talk for a moment now about how you amplify your message beyond the office of the politicians that you need to talk to. That's important because if a politician sees a message coming at them from a number of different directions, then that makes them feel like the issue is more serious than they may otherwise have taken it. It means they'll pay more attention. So how can you do this? How can you make sure that the message is getting to them in a number of different ways? Well, of course, it means making sure that message comes not just from you, but from other people as well. We've already said how there are a number of different groups in society who will be disadvantaged by this bill. People with disability, as well as LGBTIQ people, women, who, particularly those seeking healthcare, religious minorities, members of religious minorities, Indigenous people. Other groups that are concerned about this bill include trade unions. They're worried about what it will mean for conditions in the workplace. Employer groups who are worried about what it will mean for workplace inclusion policies. Medical groups, the AMA is quite concerned. And you will find in your local community, there will be representatives of these kinds of groups who are willing to stand up with you and send the message. How can they send that message? Well, obviously we've talked about meeting politicians, but it's also important that you encourage people, that you yourself and others write to the paper. Letters to the editor are a really good way to get this message across. Write opinion pieces for local newspapers. Go on talkback radio. They're always wanting people to call up about current issues. Putting out media releases so that the media can see, what the latest update is on this particular issue. And of course, Shelley and I are here to help in terms of, how you write a press release and how you write a letter to the editor. That could take up a whole video in and of itself, but I guess my basic message is always keep it really simple. Another thing that it can be important to do is, although Shelley has said that local and state politicians aren't really involved in this issue, and that's true, they're not the ones who will be passing the law, it's a federal law. Still, it can be useful to involve local and state politicians in terms of speaking out against the legislation, passing motions against the Religious Discrimination Bill. During the marriage equality campaign, local governments were really important when it came to passing motions in support of marriage equality. I think they can be just as important now in terms of passing motions against this bill. And perhaps most important of all is encouraging religious congregations and people of faith to speak up about this bill. There are lots of people of faith who do not support this legislation because they do not believe in discrimination in the name of their particular faith. They feel it discredits their faith for it to be associated with stigma and discrimination. They don't want their faith to be associated with treating other people badly, and they're very keen to raise their voices to that effect. So make sure you reach out to them as well in your local community and encourage them to write letters to the paper, to issue press releases, to get on talkback radio, and to go and talk to politicians.
Okay, so now I'd like to talk about how to respond to the other side. And I can tell you at times it can be extremely difficult and frustrating, but we always need to keep in mind that we need to stay calm, because very often they can upset you or get you angry, then they have won and you have lost. And so it's much, much better if you just stay calm and you keep your thoughts calm as well. And you remain more polite. because if you do get visibly cranky, and you can end the meeting very quickly and you have achieved nothing and wasted your time, and the politician's quite happy as you exit his office. So, but also what you need to do with, as I may have mentioned earlier, you need to have your answers prepared. And so you'd always have your standard answers. It's like, we are a secular country. There's no doubt about that. We are a secular country. We already have religious freedom. We just don't need religious privilege. We need equality. It's not like one is better than the other. We should all be considered equal. Again, when people voted yes in the yes-no campaign about marriage equality, they voted not only for same-sex couples to marry, but they also voted for them to have equality. And so we need to keep those kind of things and work them into a debate that just keeps the conversation rolling. We also need to remember as well, like, who is on side. I mean, we had the Ruddock Religious Review. That came back with the decision being, no, we don't need this Religious Discrimination Bill. They did say that it should be looked at occasionally, so that, of course, there was no discrimination with the church or for the churches. It's also a case of, you sort of should be saying, like, when they're talking about discrimination, you hear people say, oh, Christians are discriminated against all the time. But when you really ask who was discriminated and how, they always go back to the same things like Israel Folau. So you have a logic about why Folau was sacked. And it really wasn't because of his religious comments, it was because he broke the contract. So it's, again, you need your logic to always counter what they're talking about. We have, as I think Rodney mentioned earlier, we have good religious groups on our side. We have Peter Catt, the Anglican dean here in Brisbane. Father Frank Brennan, who's a Jesuit priest. Now, he was also on the religious review panel with Peter Ruddock. He doesn't think we need it. Tim Costello doesn't think we need it. There are and they're the high profile, but there are so many ministers and priests who do not believe that we need it. And they recognise it's discriminatory. But again, it's the smaller group that are wanting privilege. And who knows why they think they should have the right to be able to insult, incite hatred, and whatever term they like to use. And when you ask what a Christian, the Christians want it, they talk about they want a Christian society. Well, we're secular. Not everyone's Christian. I mean, you don't have to be any religion. And if you're not any religion, you should just be able to live your life, not have to live it by the Christians, however that may be. And again, even talking about Christians, there's some really very supportive people. It's not just in the churches. An awful lot of Christian people are supportive of us. So don't think that they're not against us. It's really the minority. And so you just need to keep that in mind. So just when you're there, just go with your facts and whatever else, and you will be fine. Thank you.
I just want to make a final point about overcoming resistance and complacency. We've talked about responding to the arguments from people who support this bill, but what I'm talking about now is how you deal with other people not listening or getting in the way, politicians who won't meet with you, politicians who are indifferent. I think that's important to talk about, because sometimes people, even though they have made the effort to visit a politician or to contact a politician, too easily deterred if they feel they're not being taken seriously, and they go, well, what's the point? And I guess my response to that is that there is always another way forward. And that includes when we're dealing with the Religious Discrimination Bill. I think Shelley mentioned earlier that, if you have one senator who's not willing to listen to you, if you're from a state, you have 11 more. You also have your local member of the House of Representatives who you can talk to. And if your politician won't listen to you, as we've said already, there's other ways to get the message through to them through the media. So they may not meet you now, but if you have letters in the paper talking about the issue, if you have people on talkback radio, that's going to make them much more willing to listen. Their door will open if they feel that there's more than just one or two people talking about this in the community. If you feel that the problem is that they don't take LGBTIQ issues seriously, then of course a way around that is to make sure that when you're seeking a meeting or when you're advocating publicly, it's not just LGBTIQ people who are doing that. You also have people there who will be affected from other communities, like people with disability or women's health advocates or whatever it might be. If they're going to be taken more seriously, then make sure they're in the room as well. They should be in the room really on every occasion, but in particular, if their voices are going to be heard and you fear that yours isn't. Another important point to make, I think, here is we need to be lobbying all politicians, not just those in the current federal government, Liberal members. The Labor Party has responded to this bill in a pretty meek and mousy way. It hasn't spoken up really strongly against the bill. And if it did, then we could be quite fairly certain it will be defeated in the Senate. So it's really important that you get along and talk to your Labor politicians as well as the Liberals. I'd say also independents and Greens, because they need to hear the arguments as well so they can make a stronger case against the bill when it comes up. It's important that you talk to all politicians across the spectrum and not just the Liberals, because while problem is a bill that the Liberals are putting forward, the solution lies with moderate and supportive Liberals who don't believe in discrimination, and it lies with the Labor Party in terms of blocking the legislation in the Senate. So you may face resistance, but there are always new ways forward. There are always other ways to get the issue moving forward. And if you can't think of any, then again, please contact Shelley and I, because we've had to do this a lot of times in the past, and we have always managed to find another way forward. In conclusion, the message I want to give is that I think we can defeat the Religious Discrimination Bill. I've been pleasantly surprised over the last few months when I've explained to people what the bill does and why it's harmful, how it rolls back existing discrimination protections and will adversely affect traditionally stigmatised minorities. People get it. They get it straight away. And I think the more we explain this bill and its damaging effects to people, the more Australians will come to realise this is not the legislation we need. We need to be out there educating people as much as we can and making sure that message is getting through to both major parties. I think that there's a good chance that if Labor is strong against this bill, and if there are moderate Liberals who are willing to stand up against it, then we can defeat this, if not in the House of Representatives, then at least in the Senate. So yeah, I'm quite optimistic about our chances of defeating this bill as long as we start speaking up and speak up now. Shelley, do you want to talk a bit about how people can do that?
Yes. Well, first of all, too, when you're talking about people speaking up, I totally agree. And the more people that speak up, the better it is. And for those who may be a little shy or even just looking for more information, we have a website called Equality Not Discrimination, and the full details will be at the end of this video. But you know, it's important. And on that, you can just sign a letter, or you can add to that letter with whatever thoughts you have. And so they go to the correct politicians and senators who are involved with the putting together of this bill. So At the end, you'll see Rodney's email, contact details, my contact details, and I can assure anybody if they are looking for ideas or support or thoughts, everybody is more than welcome to make contact with us, and please do. Don't be shy. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.